After Ibrahim's victory to rescue Lot, life settled for a while, but things didn't stay quiet for long. Ibrahim still held on to God's promise of making him a great nation, but there was one big problem. He and Sarah too had no children. They were getting older, and each year made the promise seem more impossible. One evening, Ibrahim sat outside his tent, staring at the stars. I remember seeing him look troubled, more than usual. Then God spoke to him again. "Do not be afraid, Ibrahim. I am your shield. You are very great to reward." Ibrahim sighed.
"Lord, what can you give me? I have no children. A servant in my household will inherit everything."
God's answer was clear. "This man will not be your heir. A son who comes from your own body will be your heir." Then God told Ibrahim to look at the stars. "Count them if you can," God said. "That's how many descendants you will have." I saw Ibrahim's face change. His shoulders straightened, and that familiar fire in his eyes returned. He believed God. But even with his faith, the waiting was hard. Years passed, and Sarah too began to lose hope. She came up with her own plan. "Take my servant Hagar," Sarah too told Ibrahim. "Maybe I can have children through her." It wasn't the way God had promised, but Ibrahim agreed. Hagar got pregnant, and everything changed. She stopped bowing her head when she passed Sarah too. Her eyes held this defiance, as if she were saying, "I can do what you could never." Sarah too noticed, of course, and it burned her up inside. She lashed out at Ibrahim, saying, "This is your fault. Hagar disrespect me now." Ibrahim, caught in the middle, just said,
"She is your servant. Do what you think is best."
What Sarah too thought was best was making Hagar's life miserable. She worked her harder, treated her like death. One day, Hagar couldn't take it anymore. She ran away into the wilderness. That should have been the end of her story, but it wasn't. An angel found her there, sitting by a spring, crying. He told her to go back, even though it wouldn't be easy. He said her son would grow into a great nation. Hagar named the spring, "The God who sees me." So she went back. She gave birth to a son, Ismeal, and for a while, things settled down. But then came the miracle. I remember the day the three strangers came. It was hot, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer. Ibrahim was sitting at the entrance of his tent, trying to catch some shade. Then, out of nowhere, these three men appeared, walking towards us. I didn't hear them approach, and neither did anyone else. One moment, the desert was empty, and the next, they were there. Ibrahim stood up quickly, more like he recognized them. He ran to them and bowed low.
"If I have found favor with you, don't pass by. Rest here under the tree. Let me bring you some water and food so you can refresh yourself."
The men nodded, and Ibrahim moved fast. He called Sarah from the tent and said,
"Quick, take our best flour and bake some bread."
And then he rushed to the animals, picked a tender calf, and had it prepared for them. When everything was ready, Ibrahim served the strangers himself. They sat under the tree, eating and drinking, like they weren't in the middle of a desert. I stood a little way off, watching, trying to figure out who they were. They looked like men, but something about them was different. Then one of them spoke, and his words froze me in place. He said,
"Where is your wife, Sarah too?"
"She is in the tent."
Ibrahim replied. The man smiled slightly and said,
"I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah to your wife will have a son."
Inside the tent, Sarah too heard him. I saw her peek through the flap, her face half hidden in the shadows, and then she laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was short, bitter. She muttered, "Me? Have a child? I'm old, and Ibrahim is even older. How could that happen?" But the stranger heard her, even though she hadn't laughed out loud. He turned towards the tent and said,
"Why did Sarah too laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return, and Sarah too will have a son."
I don't think I will ever forget the look on Sarah too's face when she stepped out of the tent. Her eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed. I didn't laugh," she said quickly. The stranger looked right at her and said,
"Yes, you did."
Sarah too didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, staring at the ground. The three men left not long after, walking away as silently as they had come. But the air felt heavier after they were gone, like their words were still lingering in the camp. And wouldn't you know it, just like they said, Sarah too got pregnant. Everyone was shocked. She was way too old, but it didn't matter. When the baby was born, They named him Ishaku, which means laughter. I think Sarah too laughed for real that time, joyful and free. It was a different kind of laugh, the kind that only comes when you see something impossible happening right before your eyes. But even then, the story wasn't over. Ishaku's birth changed everything, not just for Saratu and Ibrahim, but for Hagar and Ismaila too. Ishaku grew, and Ibrahim adored him. But Saratu, she started watching Ismaila, Hagar's son, like a how. Ismaila was older, stronger, and Saratu didn't like how he played with Ishaku. To her, Ismaila wasn't just a boy, he was a threat. The breaking point came one afternoon during a feast. Ismaila was laughing. What about? I don't know. But Saratu didn't like it. Her face turned dark, and she stomped over to Ibrahim.
That woman's son will not share the inheritance with my son Ishaku. Send them away, both of them.
Her voice was ice cold, but there was fire in her eyes. Ibrahim was crushed. He loved Ismaila. He had raised him, watched him grow. How could he send him away? But that night, God told Ibrahim,
listen to Saratu. Ishaku is the child of the promise, but I will take care of Ismaila too. I will make him a great nation.
The next morning, it happened. Ibrahim gave Hagar a skin of water and some bread, just enough to survive for a short time. I remember watching as he handed them to her, his hand shaking. Hagar didn't say a word. She just took Ismaila's hand and walked into the desert. The camp was silent as they left. All you could hear was the wind. I couldn't stop staring, even when they were just two small figures against the vast empty wilderness. Later, we heard what happened. The water ran out, and Hagar thought they would die. She laid Ismaila under a bush and walked away because she couldn't bear to see him suffer. But then God spoke to her again. He opened her eyes, and she saw a well. They survived, and God kept his promise. Ismaila grew up and became the father of a great nation, just like God said. But they never came back to us. Sometimes I wonder if they found peace, away from all the pain and jealousy. Hagar and Ismaila's story didn't end in the desert, but I will never forget the day they walked into it. It's a day that changed everything for them and for us.